They hadn't called in 3 years, and yet here they were, all 3 of them, sitting in my living room with real estate brochures spread across my coffee table like a verdict. I was still holding the watering can when I heard the car doors slam. 3 of them, one after another. I set the can down by the begonias and wiped my hands on my apron, watching through the screen door as my children walked up the path like strangers visiting an open house. My son Kevin came first, briefcase in hand, wearing that suit he always wore when he wanted something. Behind him, my daughter Patricia, heels clicking on the pavement, sunglasses pushed up into her hair like she was auditioning for a magazine cover. And last, my youngest, Danny, hands shoved in his pockets, looking everywhere except at me, 68 years old, and I could still read them like picture books. "Mom," Kevin said, stepping onto the porch with that smile he saved for clients. "You look great. The garden's really coming along." I didn't move from the doorway. "The garden's been coming along for 40 years. You've just never noticed." Patricia laughed. "Too bright, too quick. Always so sharp, Mom. Can we come in? We brought lunch." She held up a paper bag from some restaurant I'd never heard of. Probably cost more than my weekly groceries. I stepped aside and let them in. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd spent my whole life stepping aside for them. Old habits, I suppose, are the hardest to break. They settled into the living room, the same room where I'd read them bedtime stories, where I'd helped them with homework, where I'd sat alone every Christmas for the past 5 years, while they celebrated with their in-laws in other states. The furniture had faded, the curtains needed replacing, but the walls still held their school photos, their graduation pictures, their wedding portraits, evidence of a life I'd given to raising them. "Tea's already made," I said. "I'll get cups." In the kitchen, I took my time, listened to them whisper in the other room. Couldn't make out the words, but I knew the tone, the planning tone, the something we need to discuss tone. When I returned with the tea tray, Kevin had spread papers across my coffee table. Charts, graphs, property listings. My house, I realized, was circled in red on one of the pages. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down the tray. Kevin cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been talking, all of us, and we think it's time to have a serious conversation about your future." "My future," I repeated. Patricia leaned forward, her voice soft like she was talking to a child. "This house is too big for you, Mom. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, all this yard work, and the neighborhood isn't what it used to be." "The neighborhood is fine," I said. "The Hendersons still bring me tomatoes every summer. The Martinez family shovels my driveway in winter." Danny finally spoke, not looking at me. "It's about being practical, Mom. Houses like this, they're worth a lot right now. Market's hot. You could sell, move into something smaller, maybe one of those senior communities with activities and what?" I interrupted. "Bingo nights and cafeteria meals?" Kevin held up a hand. "Just hear us out. If you sold the house, you'd have enough to set yourself up somewhere nice, and there'd be some left over. Money you could invest. Or," he paused, glanced at his siblings, "money you could help the family with." There it was. The real reason they'd driven 6 hours to sit in my living room, not to check on me, not to see if I was lonely or sick or struggling, but to discuss what they could gain from what I'd spent my whole life building. "Help the family," I said slowly. "Which family would that be? The one that forgot to call on my birthday last March? The one that didn't visit when I had my hip replaced? That family?" Patricia's smile flickered. "Mom, that's not fair. We've all been dealing with our own things. Kevin's business has been struggling, Danny's going through the divorce, and Mark and I are trying to what?" She hesitated. "We're trying to expand. The investment property in Florida didn't work out the way we hoped, and we're a little underwater right now." I looked at each of them. Kevin, who'd borrowed $15,000 8 years ago to start a consulting firm and never mentioned repayment. Patricia, who'd asked me to co-sign her mortgage when she was 29 and then refinanced without telling me, leaving me liable for her debt for 3 more years. Danny, who'd called me crying at 2 a.m. when his wife left, who I'd wired money to for a lawyer, who'd never once said thank you. How much? I asked. Kevin blinked. What? How much do you need? That's why you're here. So let's skip the real estate presentation and get to the number. Danny shifted uncomfortably. Kevin smoothed his tie. Patricia looked at her nails. The house is worth about $400,000, Kevin finally said. If you downsize to an apartment, you'd need maybe $50 for deposits and moving costs. That leaves $350. Split 3 ways. Split 3 ways, I repeated. You've already divided it up. It's just a starting point for discussion, Patricia said quickly. We'd never pressure you. But think about it, Mom. You're almost 70, living alone. What if something happens? At least if you were in a community, there'd be people around. And you'd know that you helped us when we needed it most. I set my teacup down carefully. So carefully, because my hands wanted to shake and I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. When you needed it most, I said. Do you know when I needed it most? When your father died. 12 years ago. I sat in this house for 3 weeks before any of you called. Kevin, you sent flowers. Nice ones. From a website. Patricia, you texted. Danny, you didn't do anything at all until the funeral, and then you asked me to lend you money for a new suit because you said you couldn't show up to your own father's service looking shabby. Danny's face reddened. That was a long time ago. Grief doesn't have an expiration date. Kevin stood up, pacing like he did when negotiations weren't going his way. Look, Mom, we can sit here and rehash old grievances, or we can focus on the future. The practical reality is that you're sitting on an asset that isn't doing you any good. You rattle around this house alone. We're offering you a solution that helps everyone. Everyone except me. That's not true. You'd have security. A community. Peace of mind. I looked at him, my firstborn, the one I'd worked double shifts to send to college, the one whose tuition I'd paid while skipping meals and wearing the same coat for 6 winters. He stood there in his expensive suit, his leather briefcase, his designer watch, and he was asking me to sell my home so he could balance his books. I'd like you to leave now, I said. Patricia's eyes widened. Mom, I'll think about what you've said, but I'd like you to leave. Kevin started to argue, but Danny grabbed his arm. Let's just go. We can talk later when everyone's calmed down. They gathered their papers, their phones, their untouched restaurant food. At the door, Patricia turned back. We love you. Mom, we just want what's best. Then visit more often, I said. That's free. After they left, I sat in the living room until the sun went down. I didn't turn on the lights, just sat there in the growing dark, listening to the clock tick, feeling the silence settle into my bones. They wanted my house. The house where I'd raised them, where I'd taught them to ride bikes in the driveway, where I'd kissed their scraped knees and helped them with science projects and stayed up late waiting for them to come home from prom. They wanted to sell it, split the money, and move me into a box somewhere while they paid off their debts with my life's work. I was not going to let that happen. The next morning, I started making lists. Every loan I'd given, every bill I'd paid, every emergency check I'd written over the past 30 years. I opened the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom, the one I'd always been too sentimental to organize, and I began pulling records. By noon, I had a stack of papers 2 inches thick. Bank statements, canceled checks, handwritten IOUs that were never repaid. The numbers were staggering. Kevin alone had borrowed over $40,000 across various temporary emergencies. Patricia's total was closer to 30, not counting the mortgage fiasco. Danny, despite being the youngest and supposedly the least financially stable, had taken nearly $25,000 over the years, mostly in small amounts he probably assumed I'd forget. I hadn't forgotten. I'd just stopped mentioning it, because every time I did, they made me feel guilty for keeping track, like a mother shouldn't notice when her children took and never gave back. That afternoon, I called my granddaughter Emma. She was 23, Danny's daughter from his first marriage, the only one of my grandchildren who ever called just to talk. The others sent obligatory texts on holidays. Emma sent handwritten cards, sometimes with pressed flowers from her garden. "Grandma," she said when she answered, "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to be honest with me." There was a pause. "Okay. Did you know your father and your aunt and uncle were coming here yesterday?" Another pause, longer this time. "I heard them talking about it. Dad asked me not to say anything. He said it was a family meeting, and I wouldn't understand." "What else did you hear?" She sighed. "I heard enough. They've been planning this for months, Grandma. Ever since Aunt Patricia's Florida thing fell through, they had a whole group chat about it. Uncle Kevin even looked up property values and made a spreadsheet." My chest tightened. Months. They'd been planning this for months. "Emma, I need to ask you something else. I need you to tell me the truth." "I always do. Is there a group chat? One where they talk about me?" She went quiet. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her biting her lip the way she did when she was deciding whether to tell the truth. "Yes," she finally said. "They call it Mom's situation. I'm not in it, but I've seen it on Dad's phone. They talk about your health, your finances, whether you're declining. Last month, Aunt Patricia said she thought you were showing signs of dementia because you forgot her husband's birthday." I laughed despite myself. I didn't forget. I just didn't care to remember. Emma laughed too, but it was sad. "I'm sorry, Grandma. I should have told you sooner. I just didn't want to cause drama." "You didn't cause anything, sweetheart. They did." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that group chat, the mom's situation, like I was a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be managed, a resource to be extracted. Not a person, not their mother, just a situation. The next day, I called my lawyer. Richard Blackwell had handled my husband's estate, had helped me set up the accounts after the life insurance came through, had been the only professional who treated me like an adult when everyone else assumed a widow couldn't handle her own affairs. "Margaret," he said warmly, "it's been too long. What can I do for you?" I told him everything. The visit, the real estate brochures, the spreadsheets, the group chat. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking. "I see," he said, his tone shifting into something more serious. "And what would you like to do about it?" "I want to protect myself, my house, my savings, my everything. I want to make sure they can't touch any of it, and I want to change my will." There was a pause. "That's a significant step. It's long overdue." We met the following week. I brought my folder of records, my stack of IOUs, my list of every sacrifice I'd made and every time they'd taken without thanks. Richard reviewed everything carefully, his expression growing more troubled with each page. "Margaret," he said finally, "do you understand that you've given them nearly $100,000 over the past 20 years? I nodded. I understood each time I wrote the check. I just didn't understand that it would never be enough. He helped me set up everything. A living trust that protected my assets, a new will that redirected my estate, powers of attorney that named Emma instead of my children, explicit instructions that none of them could make medical or financial decisions on my behalf without a court order. They may challenge this," Richard warned. "They might claim you weren't competent to make these decisions." "Let them try," I said. "I've got 30 years of teaching evaluations, my book club attendance records, and a perfect score on my last cognitive assessment from my doctor. I'm sharper than all three of them combined." He smiled. "I don't doubt it." The fallout started 2 weeks later. Kevin called first, his voice tight with barely concealed anger. "Mom, I just got a letter from your lawyer. What the hell is going on?" "I made some changes to my estate planning, that's all." "Changes?" "It says here that Patricia, Danny, and I are no longer beneficiaries. That everything goes to some trust for Emma. Emma, Mom. She's 23 years old. She's also the only one who remembers my existence when she doesn't need money. This is insane. You can't just cut us out like this." "I didn't cut you out, Kevin. I just stopped including you." "There's a difference," he sputtered. We're your children. Yes. And for 20 years, you've treated that as a credit line rather than a relationship. I've given you money, time, energy, love, and I've received invoices in return. I'm done being the family bank. This isn't you talking. Someone's gotten into your head. Is it Emma? Has she been poisoning you against us? Emma has been calling me every Sunday for 6 years. You haven't called me without needing something since your father died. You tell me who's been poisoning what? He hung up on me. First time in his life. Patricia came in person, which I hadn't expected. She showed up 3 days later, no call ahead, standing on my porch with red-rimmed eyes and a tissue clutched in her hand. "Mom, please," she said. "Can we talk?" I let her in, offered tea, watched her sit in the same spot she'd sat when she'd tried to convince me to sell my home. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I just want to understand. What did we do that was so wrong?" "Iselde, do you really want to know?" "Yes." So I told her. I told her about the missed birthdays, the forgotten anniversaries, the holidays I'd spent alone while she posted photos of her family gatherings on Facebook. I told her about the phone calls that only came when she needed advice about money, the visits that only happened when she wanted me to babysit so she could go to spas with her friends. I told her about the time I was hospitalized for 2 days with pneumonia, and she found out from Emma because no one had bothered to call her. She cried. I wasn't sure if it was genuine or performance, but she cried. "I didn't realize," she whispered. "I thought you were fine. You never complained. Because every time I did, you made me feel like the problem. Like expecting my own children to remember I existed was too much to ask." She looked at me with something that might have been shame. "What can I do? To fix this?" "I don't know if you can. Just tell me what you want." I thought about it. Really thought. "I want you to call me on a Tuesday with nothing to talk about. I want you to visit on a weekend when you don't need anything. I want you to ask me how my garden is doing and actually listen to the answer. I want to be a person to you, Patricia, not a resource." She nodded slowly. "I can try." "Then try. But understand that trying now doesn't undo 20 years of not trying at all. And it doesn't change what I've decided about my estate." She left without arguing. That surprised me more than anything. Danny was the last one to contact me. He didn't call or visit. He sent a letter, handwritten, which was unexpected from a man who'd barely written anything since his college applications. "Mom," it said, "I know I don't have any right to ask for your forgiveness. I've been thinking a lot since we came to see you. About all the times you were there for me and all the times I wasn't there for you. I keep telling myself I was busy, that life got in the way, but that's just an excuse. The truth is, I took you for granted. I assumed you'd always be there, always be ready to help, always be waiting when I needed you. I didn't think about what you needed. I didn't think about you at all. Really, except as mom. This constant thing that would never change. I don't want your money. I never really did. I wanted your approval, I think. And somewhere along the way I confused taking from you with being close to you. That's messed up. And I'm sorry. You don't have to change anything in your will. You don't have to forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. And I'm not angry. I'm just sad that it took this for me to see how wrong I've been. Love, Danny. I read the letter 3 times. Then I put it in the drawer with my other important papers, next to a birthday card Emma had made me when she was 7, one with stick figures and glitter that spelled out, "Best Grandma Ever." That spring, I planted new roses in the garden. Red ones, because red was my husband's favorite. I hired a young man from the neighborhood to help with the heavier work, paid him fairly, and made him lemonade on hot days. I started a new quilt, something I'd been meaning to do for years but never had the energy for. I read books I'd been saving, watched movies I'd been postponing, took myself out to lunch at the little cafe downtown where the waitress knew my name and my order. Emma visited every month now. Sometimes she brought her boyfriend, a quiet young man who called me ma'am and asked thoughtful questions about my flowers. Once, She brought a photo album she'd made, filled with pictures of us through the years. Me holding her as a baby. Me teaching her to bake cookies. Me at her high school graduation, crying in the front row. "I wanted you to have this," she said. "So you remember that you were always loved, even when it didn't feel like it." I hugged her so hard I thought I might break something in both of us. Kevin never called again. I heard through Emma that his business had failed, that he'd moved to a smaller house in a different state, that he blamed me for not helping. I felt something about that, a small pang of guilt, but it passed. I had helped him for 20 years, and none of it had been enough to make him see me as anything more than a source of funds. Patricia called occasionally. Awkward conversations about nothing, just like I'd asked for. It wasn't connection, not really, but it was effort. I noted the effort, even if I couldn't fully trust it yet. Danny sent letters, one a month, sometimes more. He told me about his new job, his apartment, the therapy he'd started. He told me about the mistakes he was learning to recognize in himself. He never asked for money. He never asked for anything except updates about my garden. And the house? It stayed mine. Every creaky floorboard, every faded curtain, every memory pressed into the walls. I decided I'd live here until I couldn't anymore. And then I'd decide what came next. Not them. Me. On my 69th birthday, I woke up to a quiet house and a sunny morning. No children at my door, no requests, no presentations. Just me, my tea, and the birds outside my window. Emma called at 8 o'clock sharp. "Happy birthday, Grandma. I'm bringing you cake later. The good kind, from that bakery you like." "You don't have to do that, sweetheart." "I know. That's why I'm doing it." She arrived at noon with a chocolate cake and a card she'd made herself. Construction paper and markers, like she was 7 again. Inside, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that love isn't measured in transactions. I hope I can be half the woman you are someday." We ate cake in the garden, watching the roses bloom, talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her plans for graduate school, her hopes for the future, her fears about becoming like her father. "You won't," I said. "You know the difference between taking and giving. That's more than most people ever learn." She smiled, but her eyes were serious. "I learned it from you." Later, after she left, I sat on the porch as the sun went down. The house behind me was quiet but not empty. The rooms were full of memories, of history, of a life I'd built with my own hands. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. I felt complete. They will tell this story differently, I know. My children will say I grew bitter, that I turned against them, that I was manipulated in my old age by a granddaughter who saw an opportunity. They'll paint me as the villain in their narratives, the ungrateful mother who forgot everything they ever did for her. But Emma will know the truth. She'll remember the roses, the chocolate cake, the Sunday phone calls that asked for nothing but conversation. She'll remember that I didn't push them away. I simply stopped reaching for people who wouldn't reach back. And maybe someday, she'll sit with someone she loves who's been quietly shrinking for years. Someone who's given and given until there's nothing left. And she'll tell them what I learned at 68 years old. You don't have to disappear to be loved. You don't have to sell yourself to keep your family. You deserve to take up space in your own life. If you're reading this, if you've listened this far, maybe you know what it feels like to be needed but not wanted, to be useful but not valued, to be the emergency contact that no one contacts except in emergencies. Let me tell you something. I wish I'd known sooner. Your loyalty is not a debt they're entitled to collect. Your love is not an account they can overdraw. You are allowed to close the ledger. You are allowed to say, "This is mine," and you don't get to take anymore. And if no one else sees you for who you really are, I do. From my quiet garden, with my full heart, I see you. If this story touched something in you, don't just scroll past. Leave a comment. Share your truth. You never know who might need to hear it, too.